Well, good morning, everyone. It is a very early morning here for me in Melbourne, Australia. Excited to be here for this one. You can tell by the time I set my alarm just to get up and watch it. We've got a bumper field set up for the TFC Mad Monday. Round number 4, we're doing 4 laps around Gotham Grind this morning. It is a points race. There will be primes available through the sprint banner on laps 2, 3, and 4. So up to 20 points available for the riders on those laps, and then they'll have another few kilometres around the New York ground level roads to get to the finish banner where there'll be 100 points on offer for the winner through there. While we're just waiting for these riders to get started, let's have a pop onto Zwift Power and have a look at who we've got today and our standings. So we are following the B Plus race today, and a reminder that on the Mad Monday series in the Europe time zone, what they have done is split the categories, which is exciting. And so we do have a B and a B Plus race going on today, kind of split right down the middle of the FTP rating for that category. So everyone you see today in the B Plus race has an FTP of 3.6 plus watts per kilo, which is exciting. Makes for very fast-paced racing full on from the start. So if we just pop over to the series standings, you can see the Swedish Zwifters are on top in the B Plus category. They've got a 57-point lead over the Vikings. And then Team TFC, AHDR, VCRT, and ART all prominent as well. And if we have a look at the signups this morning in the B Plus race, you'll see a lot of those teams very well represented as well. So ART sending the house with a host of riders coming to continue their campaign for that team's classification. And we scroll down, the Swedish Zwifters once again very well represented last week around Yorkshire. We saw Robin Anderson take the win with a stunning final sprint coming through the field there with a really brilliant surge and into the lead and winning that one. Team HDR, again, very well represented. They have been throughout the series. We do have Daniel Wells joining us for the first time this week, and he's been on a hot streak. He's definitely going to be one to watch, especially in those intermediate sprints. Team Cryogen, again, represented with 6 riders. Team TFC, being their home series, have clearly sent another strong squad. And the Vikings from Norway looking to bridge that gap to the Swedish Zwifters and take top spot in this series. Now we also have a strong team out of the Netherlands and Scotland, so a kind of a strong patriotic nationalist kind of vibe going on today. Some teams very strongly aligned to their home countries, and I don't know if that's it, but we have seen some amazing racing in this series so far. The starts are fast and frenetic. The intermediate points are contested furiously, and so I'm expecting the same here. This is a tricky course with those intermediates, so I'm expecting a lot of attrition. I think we'll see a very fast pace set out. Maybe we'll lose a few riders over those rises on the first lap. There are a couple of spots around this course where the gradient does hit 6 or 7%. So let's see what happens as we get around to the intermediate sprint. And that's going to be tough. We're heading up over a little bump. If you race the LaGuardia loop, you know the finish. And I could see a few riders getting dropped here because of just how quick that's going to be. And if you're on the back end of a group going up a hill and you've got riders over the crest sprinting for a finish, we could definitely see some stretch. And we are off in the B grade race. Don't let the screen fool you, we're not following me. Let's jump in with Damien from AHDR for the start of this race. I was hoping to cover the A grade race as well as the B plus one, but Zwift Companion is not being my friend at the moment and is making it very difficult for me to find any riders in that A grade race. So we may very well just be sticking with the B plus race today. Nice start. These riders, interesting one. Pretty unique actually in the world of Zwift. I think, in that you head out of the pens and you're straight down onto a descent. So you do get some very nice speed up early on in this one. It does help if you are being caught at the back end. Let's have a look at how this field is stacking up. As I said, we've always seen just a mad, mad, crazy start to this one. And in this series, 90 or 100 riders tightly packed. And swinging back through the field, now we can see a similar thing. We do have a very large group of riders represented in this front peloton. I'm just trying to get to the back of it, but they're moving so quickly and rotating around that it's actually hard to do. So a pretty frantic battle here for the front of the race, and we are heading up this ride for the first time. Here's a nice little look at what this sprint prime is going to look like. So the riders will go up this little hill. Often find that as you get past these wooden barriers on the edge is about the time you need to be going all in on that sprint, because it does kick over the crest here and you do head downhill into that banner. It's very hard to make up ground with the speed the riders will be hitting on this descent. You can see the gradient there, getting down to minus 5%. So 103 starters today. We are down to 95 riders who've managed to hold on here, and possibly only 94 if Taxman can't bridge this gap. It looks like he's had a rough start to this race and maybe had to push quite hard up that rise just to try and hold on to this fast moving field. We're going to do a little loop around the LaGuardia course here, and then we will be kicking back and heading down the side of the New York course up those hills. So the way the points work today, as I mentioned at the start, we do have 3 primes. So that green sprint banner we just went through, the next 3 times through there, all the way up to the last lap, will be worth 20 points for the first place rider, all the way down to 1 point for 10th, sorry, and 3 of those. And then on the finish line, which is about 40 kilometers in today, there are 100 points on offer for the winner. So we saw last week that to win these races, you do need to be in amongst it. On the primes, and our first and second place riders both accrued some intermediate points before the actual winner of the race, Anderson from Swedish Swifters, coming through, took the 100 points, but it wasn't enough to overcome the points that had already been. So we'll probably see a similar thing here today, and riders will need to accrue some points. And it's interesting little glitch there. The rider that I was following, popping in and out of connection. We might try and make sure we're popping into someone who's got a more stable connection. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. As I was saying, the riders that were successful last week in winning the overall points, they were very prominent throughout in the intermediate sprints. So expecting to see some strong acceleration, some riders looking to position themselves nice and early for those sprints, and making sure that they do tack on. And don't get dropped through those sections as well. If you're interested in the finish, you can't just sit out. You do need to be prominent and up the front, even if you're not going for those top 10 positions through the intermediates. Still needing to be watching closely, because as we all know, anyone who's raced on Zwift, anytime the road pitches up and the pace comes on, that the field does stretch out and you are at risk of getting dropped. So we're watching that one with interest as we swing back through the middle of the map here and head up the long straight section up the side of the course. We'll come to our first sort of long rise in a little bit and see whether that can shake any of this group. If past experience is anything to go by, pretty closely matched field here, and not expecting to see these smaller rises cause a lot of attrition, unlike you might see in a regular Zwift race. These Mad Monday races are a beast unto themselves. You can just see how tightly packed these riders are. We know there's over 90 riders packed into this little part of the screen. I'm just going to try one more time here to get the technology working to see if we can jump in with the A-grade race. It is a smaller race over there. Still hotly contested in the standings, and we're seeing a lot of the big teams that are represented here in the B plus standings also represented over in the A. The big teams on Zwift definitely coming to play. Really enjoying this series being put on by TFC. We are week 4 of 10, I believe. It's a lot more fun still to be had. Might be the last week that I'm joining you to cover this one live with the clock changes here in Australia. It's going to make this a little bit of an early start for me, so I'm just looking forward to this one and enjoying the racing that is to come. So we can see the riders now going up that first really steep pinch on this side of the course. We saw double digits there, 10% gradient, and it is stretching this field out. Riders spread out over a vastly longer distance than we've seen so far, and possibly a little bit of a split starting to open up here. We can see at the very front of the field, if we can get up there, a little split happening. We saw in the overhead shot there. By the time I get up there, it might well be closed. But let's go and sit in with our aggressive riders. At the front here, we are seeing some red numbers there, obviously some serious watts being put down at the front, and a need for riders at the back to really put the hammer down and chase and zip this gap back up, which it looks like most have been successful in doing. We are heading on to the descent now. Still some stretch and some problematic gaps here happening at the back of the field. If we can jump back with Al Page from AHDI, so it seemed to be at roughly the split that was opening up. Now at the back of this group, so about 70 riders sitting in this peloton. As we pan back now, that rise has put some damage into the field. We are seeing a nasty split happening here. This is going to be tough for this group of riders to try and make up, even though it's only a 3-second gap. We do know it's a very strong peloton and about 70 riders sitting in it. It's going to be hard to bridge that one and get back on. So quick look at who is featured in that group. It was showing Chris Davies in the second group on the road from Team HDR, but looking now, he's actually well ensconced and nice and comfortable in that front peloton. We'll swing back now to a second group on the road, and then not lying down. That gap's holding at 4 seconds. So who do we have here? I do have a member of the ART team, Corin from ART Nuclear, Perrin from VCRT. He was actually prominent in the intermediates last week around the Dutchy Estate circuit, so he's been caught off guard. Obviously a strong rider, was able to hold that pace and contest a couple of those sprints and actually get some points as well. So unusual to see him at this point of the field. So maybe just caught out of position there as the road pitched up. We saw just how far that field stretched, very easy there for gaps to open up. And let's see if this group can work together. They gap now out to 5, 6 seconds. It looks like they're not giving up. We're still seeing some big numbers as the riders roll to the front, pulling over 4 watts a kilo to try and pull this gap back and get these riders back in the race. But it's not looking particularly promising. Anyone who's tried to close a gap like this on a Zwift race, even though those riders remain visible, it is no small feat. It's not going to be easy at all for these riders to do. Now, holding that gap at 5, 6 seconds, this is going to get really interesting because the road is going to pitch up again very shortly as we head down the other side of this map past the lake. And we can see that gap's starting to stretch now. It's starting to extend out. I think despite these riders' best efforts, it might just prove to be a little bit too far, not quite enough engines back here to contest with the fast pace up the road of 70 or so riders, all rolling through at the front. And 8 seconds now, so I think we're going to be bidding a sad farewell to this group of riders and jumping up with our peloton, which now sits at 74 riders. Or thereabouts. It's going to be hard to get the numbers exactly right with just how quickly these riders are cycling through and rotating. So not far away now from the lap banner to close out the first lap. This was sort of a lead-in lap, no intermediate sprint on lap 1. I'm sure the riders are grateful for that. That would have just added to the chaos. We've already seen some attrition at the back of this field, so 103 riders starting out. We have lost 30 or so off the back already, and this intermediate sprint that's coming up in a couple of kilometers time, I'm sure is also going to be creating its fair share of chaos. It's going to be interesting to see on this rise exactly what happens. Anyone who's raced it and finished at this banner will know that it can kick off pretty early. And often I've seen winners come from, leading a 30-second sprint from the bottom of that rise and just holding it all the way to the top. As I said, it is very hard to make up ground if you aren't at the front as the road goes over the crest and heads downhill towards the sprint banner. So cutting back through the middle here, over the bridge, then we will take a left turn at the roundabout up onto this rise. We're going to get up to the front of this race. And let's see who our top 10 riders are going to be to take the first points of this race, announce themselves as contenders in today's sprint category. So where will it kick off? About 400 meters from the line here. And it is starting very, very early. Damien Hassan from AHDR, he's pushing up to Celia Swifters. We saw Anderson, we know he's got sprint legs. He absolutely hammered them in Yorkshire last week. It's just the other riders have dropped out. I don't think it's going to matter. Anderson's still letting out, but Hassan closing. Damien pushing hard down the hill. Is he going to get there? No, he's not. Anderson from Swedish Swifters takes the full 20 points. Hellstrom from Swedish Swifters as well. Prominent, closing there behind Damien Hassan from Team AHDR. It looks like Swedish Swifters may have even gone first, third, fourth, possibly even fifth. Hard to tell just looking at the names, but it looks like those jerseys were very prominent at the front of the field, and Damien Hassan from Team AHDR getting into second and splitting up the Swedish Swifters contingent, but the leaders of this series from Sweden in the B+ category have started exceptionally well, taking the vast majority of points available through that sprint. And let's have a look now at what sort of damage that's done. That was a long acceleration. We saw the red numbers popping from the bottom of the rise, and this has absolutely shattered this race. So a front group here of 28 riders, and now we can start seeing some time gaps as we move down the field. Gainer from TFC with Turner, his teammate, looking to get back onto this group. A little further back, we have more AHDR riders here. Again, looking to get on, and this peloton is swelling again. Those sprinters giving their legs a little bit of a break. But we do have splits happening. Looks like a 3-second gap at the back here, 53 riders in the front group. Keeping in mind that we are going to have or hit that nasty pinch and those double-digit gradients again in a few kilometers. So anyone who hopes to be back on and contesting this race is going to have to really get their skates on and get back in this front group of 53. 4-second gap now. to these riders who've been gapped by that acceleration through the intermediate sprint. A couple of Cryogen riders in with GT from TFC now. Al Page from Team AHDR working at the front, 5.2 watts per kilo. He's not ready to lie down, not ready to say this race is done and dusted yet, not one little bit. Is he going to have some company and some people willing to work for him? We see now another little gap further back, and maybe this, if these two little groups can get together, they might be able to just make that gap and get back into that peloton at the front of the field. Let's check back in with Al Page's efforts here to really lift that group all the way back up. So we have riders everywhere across the field here. It's very hard to track a particular group. I'll try and get back in with Al Page and co. Trying to close that gap just as we head through that section of the course where the roundabout is and the routes can kind of diverge. It does make it a little bit hard just to, this riders list does jump around a bit. And look at this, we do jump back in with Al. We've got him now. He's put in a monstrous effort. He's been sitting above 4 or 5 watts per kilo, trying to close this gap, and he's found himself in no man's land at the moment. The rest of the group didn't have the legs to follow his surge to try and get back onto the group. So we are down to just 54 riders in contention. And is it going to be 53? We'll sit in with Al for a little bit and see whether he can have a surge. Can he continue? He's pushed hard, 168 beats per minute now. Over 300 watts for a lot of this chase. And now facing that, the smallest yet the largest gap in the world of Zwifting is that gap to the back of the peloton. It looks like that might be cue in the rack for Al. Heroic effort to try and chase back on, try and drag his group back on. Didn't get much help there. And we are heading up to this rise and that nasty 10% pinch again. So unfortunately, that's going to be the end of Al's race in the peloton. But he does have some riders here coming through to work with and finish this race off. So we'll jump back in, 53 riders left. We are on to the next tricky pinch on this course. We saw a group of riders get gapped on this rise previously. We'll see whether this pace is going to slacken off a little bit now that we've had this selection. About half the field off the back, it doesn't look like there's going to be any respite though. Swedish Swifters again, prominent at the front, stretching this one out. And the gaps starting to form at the back. Looks like a fairly condensed group at the front. So no one really going off the front and attacking, but let's have a look at the damage that's being done behind. We're definitely going to have a smaller group coming through here and heading into that intermediate sprint on lap number 2. So much more select peloton. We were sitting in with Nick. You can recognize him in the red cap there. So he's in 33rd spot. Let's see these riders further back. So we did have 53 going into that hill. Maybe about 45 or 46 now, as some more riders do manage to bridge back on. We have lost a handful here. As you sit in with Bastos from PTZ, latest rider, latest victim of the frenetic pace of this race. And he'll slide back and join in the gruppetto to finish this one off. So 47 riders left to contest this one. The attrition continues. But a nice tight group here. Hopefully a chance to recover for those riders who've managed to hold on so far through the surges. Moving at 64 kilometers an hour, this is definitely not going to give these guys much of a chance to sit in and rest and recover. Swedish Zwifters obviously riding very strongly here. We saw they had a big contingent entering the race, but I can still see a lot of jerseys very well represented. Here we've got a few of the yellow from TFC, the distinctive blue and orange of Team AHDR also in amongst it. It looks like we might have a little bit of movement at the front here. Jers from SDW. There's a name that was prominent last week as well. Actually came through and won one of the intermediate sprints last week. So obviously a rider in form, feeling confident. It's just gone, put a little bit of a surge into this group to stretch things out as we do head into our second climb of this lap. Kind of think of there being two sort of more prominent. You know, this course does roll. You're very rarely on flat roads around New York, but there are two main pinches, and this is the second of this lap, the last one, the last main feature before we head into this fast 1.5, 2 kilometer run in back to the start finish line and the intermediate sprint. Only about 1.5 K after that. Let's have a look at whether this group can stick together up here. Whether this pace is going to slacken or not, it doesn't look like it. And based on previous Mad Monday experiences, both as a rider and as a commentator, they don't let off. And it's one of the functions of this field being so closely matched. With these split categories, everyone has the watts and the engine to hold on to the pace being set, even if it is a fairly furious one. Just PHDR riders in the chat. It's a little bit of a question of the intermediate sprint. So just confirming that they are at the sprint banner on laps 2, 3, and 4. So nice little downhill run in here. A little bit of a chance for recovery, but we will be back sprinting again very shortly. So we saw some very aggressive tactics from the Swedish Zwifters paying dividends on the lap 2 intermediate sprint, setting off early up that rise, possibly taking 4 of the top 5 positions. So it'll be interesting to see in the lap 3 intermediate sprint coming up whether any other teams respond to that. Do they try their own move to break things up early? Do they just try and sit in and follow the move from the Swedish Zwifters? We're expecting to see some more aggressive riding from them here. Much smaller group heading into this intermediate sprint compared to the previous lap. It does make it that little bit harder to get away and have the element of surprise, because riders aren't going to be caught quite as far back as they do jostle for position over the bridge here. Let's get up to the front of the field and see where the moves are going to come from. Maybe we can find some of our likely suspects from Swedish Zwifters. Are they going to be the ones to light it up again? As we go into the rise, actually, it's Bolton from TFC who's going to kick us off. He's up to 9.7 watts per kilo as we make the turn onto the rise. And he opens up a couple of bike lengths back Desalius from Swedish Swifters following closely. Wells from AHDR prominent this time. We see another TFC rider there. In amongst it, Bolton continues to lead. Onto the descent now. Here come the Swedish Swifters contingent. Hellstrom over the top. Desalius second. Perrin, who we've mentioned before, prominent. Wells from AHDR in amongst it. I think it was Desalius who managed to hold on there and take the max point. Swedish Swifters prominent again. Looks like about 3 of the top 6. With Perrin from BCRT scooping some points there, and Sudworth from TFC, the other rider. Yeah, Damien Hassan. I saw Daniel Wells' name up near the front, but on screen it did look like Damien, who once again was in that top 6 riders. I don't know the exact order there. A little bit hard to call over the line, but Damien obviously having a great day. He's featuring again in the sprint points. So Swedish Swifters continue to dominate this race. And let's have a look now at what's happened to this peloton. This looks like a huge split through that acceleration. We may have just about lost half of this field by the look of it. Let's swing back through and find the time gaps. Hershey from the Scottish Swifters looks like he is the man leading the efforts to bring it back together. Gapping a group of about 10 riders. We're trying to bridge across a 3-second gap now to the peloton. Hershey 5.3 watts a kilo. Can he tag back on? It's going to be a tough ask. We've seen this happen so many times today already. Once that gap opens out to 2 or 3 seconds, being a solo chaser trying to bridge, it's a really tough ask, but might he just do it? He's about to get some help. Croy from Rhino coming through, and they have managed to tack back on to this group. So about 32 riders represented now. There's a few more coming back. We might just have enough coordination in this group to stitch this back together. It looked like the gap might be just too big, as Hershey kicks it up again to try and drag this group back to the peloton. About 15 riders caught off the back here by that acceleration through the intermediate sprint. But it does look like they're going to work well together here and bring it all back together. So we might still have a fairly big field to contest the remainder of this race. We'll continue sticking in with Hershey. They put in a monstrous individual effort there to zipper this back up. A few of the Team AHDR riders are going to be grateful for that. I can see Nick, Chris in that second group, Andy Turner, the beneficiaries of the work being done there just to bring this back, not quite all together as a peloton, but we are getting there. So we might still have those 47 riders who did go into the intermediate sprint look like they're all going to come back together and see us through on lap number 3 of 4. Let's see what impact that effort has had getting back to the peloton on these riders, because we are heading into our next big climb. Heading up the west side of this map, we've seen some attrition here before. You can see here sort of a steady rise before we get to the steepest parts of this pinch. Swedish Swifters at the front, driving the pace. Commanding performance so far from that team. Significantly more so than last week, even though they did ride very well and scored well and held on to their series lead. This looks like an absolute they've just taken over this race and this series, quite frankly. Today they had 4 of the top 5 riders on lap 1 or on the first intermediate sprint. At least 3 of the top 4 or 5 or 6 on that second one. So working well as a team. and looking well positioned for any attacks and the surges as we head up this rise on lap number 3 or 4. So all of our riders here have certainly shown they've got the legs today. They've managed to hold on through some serious aggressive racing. We'll see what toll that's taken once again. Field stretching out. Some big efforts here at the back as the time gaps start to emerge as we head over the crest onto the descent. Tricky little part of the course this, the acceleration of the group as the road does pitch down. And it may have just taken its toll here. It's going to be tough work for Andy Turner and Chris Davies from Team AHDR at the back here. That might just have been one climb too many for these two. And before you know it, 4-second gap opening up to the peloton. It can happen that quickly on this course with the rises and the steep pinches, and especially those accelerations down the far side of the crest. And it does look like once again that climb has claimed a couple of victims out of the peloton. Andy and Chris. Croy from Rhino caught in the middle looking to bridge, but it looks like he's going to be unsuccessful. Hershey, who we saw put in a heroic individual effort to get back onto the peloton after the intermediate sprint, again is finding himself on the wrong end of a split. No friends this time to help him close this gap either. And look at that wattage dropping there. Looks like that might be queuing the rack for Hershey from the Scottish Zwifters. So a few more riders coming to grief on these rolling roads of New York. We're down to 44 now. As we swing around the top of the course, head back towards that lap banner to close out lap number 3 of 4. I don't know if it's my internet connection or if I'm just out of luck today, picking riders who keep dropping out, but we do keep seeing riders dropping in and out. Sitting in now with Hellstrom from the Swedish Zwifters. We saw him light up that intermediate sprint, possibly win it. I think he might have taken, no, saw Tesalius come over the top, but Hellstrom was prominent in that one. I think earned a top 3 spot and some great points for his team on that intermediate sprint. He's cruising along 149 beats per minute. Nice solid endurance heart rate for most riders in this grade, I would think. You can see a number of Swedish Zwifters teammates around him represented in this front group, looking ready to score well again on our third and final intermediate sprint. But first they got to contest with this climb. We haven't seen any attacks as such up these, just the usual surge of pace at the front of the field. Everyone trying to stay in position and stretching the field out on these steeper parts of the course. Everyone looking pretty solid coming up this hill. The hill on this side of the lap has definitely not caused as much trouble as the one shortly after the intermediate sprint, with legs still hurting from that surge of pace, whether or not you actually contested it. And so no dramas for the riders this time, hopefully getting a little bit of recovery time in. Nice little run into the start-finish line. Hopefully enjoying it this lap, because next lap, by the time we get to this stage, it's all going to be about positioning for that final sprint. Been a few names that I would have thought would have been more prominent. I haven't seen much of Richard Gubby from TFC, who rode very well last week and is a consistent performer. So we might see something on this last lap from him. Daniel Wells from AHDR hasn't been up in the mix on the intermediate sprints. He might be thinking about the overall and winning the stage, being first over the line today and collecting those 100 points as we come through the finish line. We have seen last week's winner Anderson from Swedish Swifters prominent again in this one. Hasn't collected the maximum points yet in any of the intermediates, but has been thereabouts. So he may be looking to employ a similar strategy and just collect a few points on the intermediates without being the one to light it up and lead it out, and then unleashing his patented big surge through the finish line to try and take another win in the full 100 points. So we're a bit far away now from the third and final intermediate sprint. Comes up pretty quickly with the speed that the riders hit on this descent. So as we go over the bridge, let's have a look at how this one shapes up. We have seen riders lighting the sprint up particularly early, not waiting to get onto the rise. I'm seeing red numbers on both laps pretty much before we've even started climbing up this little hill. Having a look now through this rider list to see where are some likely agitators. Bolton from TFC was the one that set us off last lap. Looks like he's just going to be following wheels this time. Nick Ludwig from AHDR taking the initiative. And he is going to kick us off. Hellstrom again prominent from Swedish Swifters, pushing up Perrin from VCRT. Now there's a rider and a name that we've seen prominent in his intermediate sprints. Who else have we got? So Hellstrom, Halbert, another name we've seen prominent, but it looks like Daniel Wells from Team HDR kicking over the top. He might have taken that one out. Some other names prominent: Celius from AHDR, Hellstrom, from Swedish Swifters, Hellstrom from Swedish Swifters as well. Perrin from VCRT, a name we've seen. Halbert from ART, hadn't seen him yet today, but was prominent last week around Yorkshire. He was up there collecting points as well. Missed the full makeup of that group. That was by far the closest finish we've seen on these intermediate sprints, and Daniel Wells announcing his presence in this race, showing he's got a kick, and we might be seeing more of him at the start-finish banner. So fairly long-range effort there once again, and yes, we're seeing that patented gap opening up to the back of the field. Let's jump in there now with our chasers, Sertarina from the Swedish Swifters in amongst it. Looks like a fairly... we've got a bit of a contingent of the Swedish Swifters hanging there at the back. Maybe just looking if they can help out their teammate to latch back on here. We've got a couple of these big teams represented at the back. Stuart Williams from AHDR, Dodds from VGC, Turner from TFC in this little group. We'll see if this group of 5 riders can work together to catch the 40 or so up the field in our main peloton. Four-second gap now opening up. We've sort of seen that's been about the number where the gaps have proved to be fatal. I did see a rider just off the front here. Actually, maybe it's a lapped rider. We don't want to be back in with me. In peloton, who do we have? at the front here. I'm not sure if that was an attack or a lapped rider, but let's have a look at what that's done to the group. We can see our group of 5 there. In the distance, it looks like that's going to be a bridge too far for them, and we are going to be down to 39 or so riders who are going to contest the finish of this race. I'll just swing back across the bridge where we see they're jockeying for position on the intermediates. It's about 7 kilometers to go now. We have 2 more noticeable or meaningful rises to contend with. Those are going to be interesting now. As we get to the pointy end here, the stakes go up a little bit on those climbs. We've seen this one in particular on this side of the course that does pitch up to 10%, has been the more decisive of the 2. Obviously, these riders feeling these rolling roads and these pinches. Darren from AHDR just observing that this so-called flat route perhaps doesn't feel all that flat. And looks like we've got some aggression at the front of the field. Nick Ludwig from AHDR. We saw him kick things off in that intermediate sprint. He's obviously got some gas left in the tank, and he's not going to be waiting around to see if this field accelerates up the rise and gaps anyone. He's going to make his own luck today, pushing off the front, opening up a 2-second gap. Possibly some sort of coordinated attack here from the AHDR riders looking to set something up for the sprinting crew. They do have a really strong set of sprinters in today's race. We've seen them, Damien and Daniel Wells, prominent in the intermediate sprints so far. And as the road pitches up now, Nick is getting hauled in by this peloton. Doesn't look to have managed to dislodge anyone off the back. They've worked together, stuck together as a group to reel in this move. And we are back together again for the steepest part of this course. That surge can attack back on. And once again, another dropout. But thankfully a brave one, and Nick is still in touch there, in contact with the group. So feeling the effects of that attack for sure. We'll see whether as this road flattens out and heads back downhill, he can tag back on and get in that draft. I'm not going to be helped by some movement here at the front. Let's try and jump up to the front of the field and see what's going on here. Sunden from Swedish Swifters. Looks like he was just putting a little bit of hurt on this group. We can just try and catch him. There he is, about 5Ks to go here. Sunden is the next one to put the hurt on this group. He's opening up a nice little gap here too. It's extending out to 3 seconds now. So maybe inspired by the aggressive riding of Nick Ludwig from Team HDR. And Sunden not waiting for anybody. This field are wise to it though. They're moving quickly, closing down these gaps. I think let's follow up this move as well as we accelerate downhill. Sunden goes to the back. He's had his fun. Looks like that distinctive red cap of Nick Ludwig is in amongst the peloton. So thankfully that attack didn't put an end to his chances today. As we swing around the very top of this course, we're going to get back onto that long straight, up that last rise, and then that frenetic last kilometre and a half. Slightly downhill to the finish. It's always fast. Very tempting to those that do like a long breakaway because the finish line is sort of just there, off in the distance. But the peloton does move very quickly down that hill. Tricky one for the sprinters. You do need to start your sprint that a little bit earlier because it is that downhill gradient. You can afford to be on the gas from about 350 meters out. And just judging by the way that these riders have attacked the intermediate sprints today, I think we will be seeing this one light up particularly early. You don't want to be caught out of position in that final kilometre here. This feels like it could light up at any moment in that finishing section as we come past a few lapped riders here. Let's see whether there's any more attacks. You'd think these riders would be completely gassed from the surges that we've seen through the intermediate sprints, but obviously still some riders who've got something to give and maybe trying to exploit those tired legs, but they're holding well together, this elite group of 40 or so riders at the front of this race. We're watching here now our last ride, our last chance to really drop riders off the back of this group. It looks like things are settling down now as we do prepare ourselves for this final run into the finish. Only a couple of kilometers to go. Few little surges at the front here, a little bit of movement and rotation of riders, but for the most part sticking together in a nice little blob. Let's have a look at the field and who is in amongst it to see who might take this one out today. So, plenty of Swedish Swifters jerseys up there at the front. Team TFC, they've held on well through all these attacks and surges. They've got 5 riders represented here. Team HDR prominent again with the big contingent they're sending, but this has definitely been the Swedish Swifters' day. They've been in everything, in numbers. They've worked well together. Different riders taking the initiative, attacking with intermediate sprints. Not long to go here. Let's get us up to the front of this group and see what's going to happen here. We see some red numbers early. Halbert from ART. We'll jump in with Dan Wells. Strong sprinter. This is a long range effort. We haven't got to the bridge left, still a few hundred meters to go. Hellstrom prominent. Anderson from Swedish Swifters, 14.5 watts a kilo. He's gone long. He's going to try and take it all here. Huge watts from Anderson from Swedish Swifters, and he's opened up a gap. It's a long sprint, but he's going to go all the way. Anderson's going to take this one out. Brooks from ART, Wells from Team HDR chasing. Teselius from Swedish Swifters prominent. Halbert from ART. Damien Hassan's had a big day. Also in amongst it in that final sprint. But Anderson from Swedish Swifters, again, just too strong in that final part of the race. And well done to all these riders. Some serious effort being put in there. Up those intermediate sprints, I will just try and jump back in with some riders who are still finishing the course. Stu Williams coming in from Team HDR to finish his race here. Stephen from HDR just heading up over that rise. He's going to be coming in a few minutes' time to finish off. These riders here finished their efforts for the day. A nice little big group here. Back around 73rd, 80th position. Still putting a little bit of a dig in to finish this race. Well done to all of our riders today. That was a frenetic pace, as it always is on Mad Monday. But thank you for joining us on Zwiftaholics for this one. Tremendous effort from the Swedish Swifters today, just too strong throughout this race, at the intermediate sprints and at the finish. Anderson again, showing his class and leading out early, but just gapping the entire peloton and giving them no chance to get back on. So he takes yet another win. We will see how the points shake out, but absolutely the Swedish Swifters' day today. So well done to that team, and we will see you again next time. Thanks for watching.